Hello, this is part of the ISDM Information System Development and Management course, and we will discuss about usability assessment topic, which will allow us to learn how can we evaluate and assess the usability of the system. Let's go. First, let's discuss what is usability assessment. Of course, usability is an overall evaluation of how a system performs in supporting a particular user for a particular task. So there are several criteria and dimensions that we can perform this kind of evaluation. For example, we can think about the speed criteria, which is, can we complete a task efficiently? Or we can discuss about accuracy criteria, which is, how does the output of the system provide to us? Is it accurate and correct according to what we expect? Or we talk about satisfaction, that is, whether or not users are satisfying with the output, with the performance, with everything about the system. So it's a satisfaction criteria. Determining usability success factor. There are several of the dimensions that we can look into the detail, apart from what we discussed and gave as example previously. First, we can think of the consistency of terminology, formatting, titles, navigation, response time. Second is the efficiency dimension, whether it is possible to minimize required user actions, or we can discuss about ease of use, whether the system is self-explanatory, whether the outputs and the labels are meaningful and easy for user to understand. And we can also talk about or evaluate in terms of the format of the data that are displayed, the symbols used, the notation and graphical use. And the last one here is the flexibility, whether the system can maximize user option for data input according to preference. There are several characteristics for consideration when we are performing usability assessment. First, definitely, is about the user. For the user, we should consider their experience, their skills, motivation, education, and personality. Second is the task that we want to assess the usability. It could be about the time, the errors, the work durations. Third one is about the system itself, the platform that we use to run and provide the system, and also the environment of the whole system, the social and physical issues, for example. So what can be measures for the usability? Definitely, there are a variety of measures that we can take into consideration, but important ones are discussed here. First, the time to learn. If we say that the system should be easy to use and user-friendly, definitely the time that the users take in order to learn how to use a new system should not be very lengthy. And also, we should take into account the speed of the performance. This is another measure that people usually pay attention to. How fast the system can run and also return the output, for example. The third one is the rate of errors, how accurate the system is, and how much users perhaps produce error or make the error by using the system. Maybe the system itself is not wrong, but if the system is too difficult to use and the user may not know the right way of using the system, users themselves may use the system wrong and produce wrong answers and wrong output. And the fourth criteria discussed here is retention over time. That means after we learn how to use the system and after a while, suppose we don't use it, how long does it take for us to forget how to use the system? That is the retention. If another month we can still remember how to use it, that means the system is not too difficult. The next one is subjective satisfaction. We use the term here subjective because when we talk about the user satisfaction, usually it is a little bit subjective based on the opinion of the user, right? Whether the user like it or not, whether the user thinks it is easy or it is not easy. So with this kind of measure, it's pretty much subjective. And the last one here is consistency of the layout of the design of the user interface, for example. After we learn about the measures, then how about the evaluation methods? We know those measures, right? And then how can we evaluate each of those measures? Which methods could be available? Of course, for highly usable system, we often employ what is called user-centered design. And in order to ensure usability, we may need to use test early and often approach. That means we cannot just make and perform one-time evaluation, right? But should perform often evaluation and also adapt to the feedback and the input from the user so that we can make the usability of the system improved and better. And a variety of testing methods available are as follows. The first one, baseline usability testing on an existing site. Second one, we can use focus group, surveys or interviews in order to establish user goals. Next, we can also use wireframe testing to evaluate navigation of the system. We can also perform first click testing to make sure that users go down to the right part or not. And usability testing to gauge the user interaction is another way that we can also do. And the last one is again the subjective one, right? When we talk about satisfaction survey, this is how to see the opinion of the users based on his or her satisfaction. So each of these available methods, I wish you will go further by clicking on this link and read each of them. Whatever measures we want to evaluate the usability of our system, it is the best that we plan a usability test before we conduct a test or an assessment. So in order to make a good plan of a usability test, these are a list of items that we should take into account. First, we need to determine what is the scope of the test. That means, what are we testing? Second, the purpose of the test, of the usability. Identify the concerns, the questions, and the goals of the test. That is the second item. The third one is the scheduling and location. Where are we going to make this usability test? Where and when? Okay. And the next one is the sessions. How long do you think that the test would take? How long time? The length of each session. For example, a usability test could last for 1 hour or 90 minutes per group of users. How about the equipment? If we plan to conduct a usability test, do we require some setup of equipment or system or a laptop or machine and so on? Because if you want users to try to use our system and tell us whether they are happy with the system, or we measure the time it takes, we measure the errors that it produces and so on, we really need to provide the equipment, the setup, installation, and everything. So this has to be part of the plan. And the last one here in this slide is participants. That means how many of the users that we perform a test, and who are they? Are they just end user? Are they management user? Do we need to partition or group them or select them properly? Where are they from? And so on. So this has to be well planned before we really conduct a usability test. Next, there are 4 items to consider. First is the scenario. Are we giving certain test scenarios? That is, we may need to prepare test scenario, a story, assuming that a user is doing these kind of tasks, then you use the system to fulfill and accomplish the task, something like this. And then we should provide not only one single scenario, maybe we prepare a number of scenario, which could be, for example, 10 plus or minus 2 scenarios for a typical of 60-minute test. The reason we may need to have a variety of scenarios because we want to cover as many as cases of the user scenario or use cases as possible, important ones I would say. And we could have different numbers of scenarios for different types of devices. For example, if it is a desktop or laptop, maybe we plan for 10 to 12 scenarios. If it is like for a smartphone and mobile devices, a set of scenarios may differ and may have different numbers, less or more, something like that. And the next item that we need to consider is metrics for the test. The metrics define what we want to measure, right? So there are two types of metrics here that you can see. Quantitative metrics in the below one and subjective metrics, the above one. So I will go to the subjective metrics first. Usually for these subjective metrics, they differ based on the user. For example, it could be a list of pre-session questions such as questionnaire related to the background of the user, the age, the gender, the work position of the user, and background education, for example. And later on, after each scenario or each task or the test has been conducted completely, then a questionnaire which asks about easy to use, satisfaction, and opinion of the user could be done by the group of testers, right, or participants. Then this is a kind of subjective metrics that I already mentioned because it is based on the opinion of the users. And another kind of post-session questions could be the overall satisfaction, the overall easy to use of the system, and the likelihood of the user whether he or she will recommend and will continue to use the system or not. If suppose we deploy and deliver the system, his or her opinion about continue to use the system could be recorded and surveyed. Then when we talk about the quantitative metrics, these are the things we would like to measure in our test, and these are not subjective. This is more objective, so this is a good thing that we would like to focus as well. For example, we can measure time on task. How long time does it take for each task, for each scenario that each user fulfill work on it by using the system? What are the error rates or what are the correction rates, accuracy rate by using the system? And yeah, so this is the completion rates versus error rates and many other criteria that we can measure as well based on these quantitative metrics. And the last item that we should consider is the roles. And this is a list of staff who will participate in the usability testing and which role they play in the system, in the organization. They are just end user, they are manager, they are system administrator, or who they are. And also, sometimes during the usability test, usability specialist should be the facilitator of the session. We should have the one, we call it in this slide as usability specialist. That means it is the person who performed the test or the experiment. When we identify test metrics for our usability test, these are examples of what we should define and consider. For example, if we want to measure the successful task completion rate, that means each scenario requires a participant to complete a typical task. And of course, you need to define what does it mean by successful completion, because otherwise it is not possible to know whether after working on a system, whether a user successfully complete such tasks or not. So in this case, you need to define We consider user complete if he or she can, at the end of the task, achieve the right answer or do the right thing. For example, if it is a system about placing an online order, okay, place an online order for a stock, then if finally a user can make an online order and send it to the supplier, then it is considered to be successful, something like that. And the second example here is critical errors. So what are the errors that the user could make and the rate that we record, right? And of course, in these critical errors, they are the errors that we consider them to be critical. So that means if the user perform a task and produce such kind of error, it is considered to be critical error. A different one is non-critical error. Non-critical errors are the errors that can be recovered or solved by the participant themselves, and actually these kind of errors do not result in the participant's ability to successfully complete the task. So this is very important, because if actually, this is important to understand the distinction between non-critical errors and critical errors. Because for non-critical errors, it means that users can recover or resolve the errors and the problem by himself, and finally, users can also successfully complete his or her task. But of course, with non-critical errors, although users can complete the task, they are performing the task less efficiently, because during the working of the system, using of the system, the users come across certain errors, mistakes, and so on, right? And some examples of these non-critical errors should be like wrong navigation. Maybe you try the wrong menu and you could not find the menu that lead you to the resulting page of performing some operation. So you click on several menus. Oh, this one you don't find the data that you want. Click another one, and finally you find it somewhere. So along the way that you still cannot find the data you want or the menu that you want, these are considered to be non-critical, right? Because finally you can find the right menu or the right button to lead you to the data that you want to access, or the function that you want to perform. Other sets of test metrics are given as example here. First one is error-free rate. This error-free rate means the percentage of test participants that perform no errors at all. So we want to see, for example, if you want to claim that your system is very easy to use and very easy to understand and find the right menu for performing certain tasks, so and so, maybe you should target on error-free rate as well. Given a task, if how many percent of participants never make any error at all, if that percentage is pretty high, then it means that your system is pretty easy, right? Every user can perform such a function without any mistake. The second test metrics here, which is pretty used in very commonly used, is time on task. That is, it defines the amount of time that it takes the participant to complete the task. So you may need to measure the time from the starting of performing the task until the completion of the task. How long does it take? How many seconds, how many minutes that after you assign a task and the user can fulfill the task and complete the task without error. And the third one here in this slide is subjective measures. This one, as I already mentioned, when there are subjective measures, they may contain certain bias or based on opinions of the user. So it can be participants' satisfaction on system ease of use, ease of finding information that he or she wants, okay, and in this way of subjective measures, usually a kind of survey form in a Likert scale method of 1 to 5 or 7 to 1 to 5 or 1 to 7 point Likert scale can be used. And the last metrics that is considered here is likes, dislikes, and recommendations. You can ask the participants to give an input about what do they like most, what they like the least, and what would be their recommendation of improvements for the system. Another tool that we can use to assess the usability of the system is called System Usability Scale, or SUS. This one, SUS, provides as a reliable tool for measuring the usability. And what is it? Actually, it contains is a kind of questionnaire and survey form. It's a 10-item questionnaire with 5 response options. So it's a kind of 5-point Likert scale, starting from strongly agree to strongly disagree. So 10 questions with 5-point Likert scales. And these SUS is originally created by John Brooke in 1986. So definitely it's pretty old, but still has been used and has been referred quite a lot. So there are a number of a variety of products and services, hardware, software, mobile devices, websites, and applications that have been evaluated their usability based on these SUS, System Usability Scale. This slide shows what does the SUS look like in terms of the 10 questions and also the 5 scale. Okay, so these are the 5 scales starting from strongly disagree to strongly agree. And these are the 10 questions. And user, of course, fill in this form or questionnaire by answering each of the question and check his opinion based on each question. For example, question 1 say, I think that I would like to use this website frequently, if I am a user, whether I agree strongly or disagree strongly or in certain scale or not. Second question, for example, asks about, I found this website unnecessarily complex. Agree or not agree, strongly or in which scale. Okay, so you could see that actually each of the question will be positive and negative alternatively. So question number 1 is a very positive to the system. Okay, think that the system is very good, very easy to use, while the second one is kind of pretty negative question about the system, and then the third one is again positive. So this way they would like to make sure that the user just not mark 11111 or 44444 for all the questions straight. Okay, so they just want to make sure that users answer this questionnaire objectively somehow. And after we have collected the survey and the questionnaires, of course we need to collect the data and the results. So the score breakdown sheet here will show us that how can we interpret the meaning of the SUS tool. So if the overall meaning that we achieve, for example, is around 70 score, that means the system is about between good and okay. But of course, in the range that is more close to the good, if we achieve 70. But if we achieve 80, for example, it means that our system is between good and excellent. Okay, something like this. And you can see as well here that acceptability range start from the score of 0 to almost 50, to around 50. So that means if our system falls around this, within this range of score for SUS, it means our system is a kind of not acceptable for the user. While if our system is between 50 and 70, we are in the marginal range. And there are two marginal range, low marginal or high marginal. And the last part here is from 70 up to 100. We are in the acceptable range. Okay, so why should we consider using SUS? What are the benefits we could get? Of course, the thing is SUS has become an industry standard somehow. There have been references by over 1,300 articles and publications, and that means it's kind of reliable and widely used, widely adopted, and widely accepted somehow. And other kinds of usefulness and benefits is that it is very easy scale that we can administer to participants. Okay, the questionnaires are easy to understand also, and the interpretation, the meaning, the score that we obtain can be easily interpreted and understood by the user, by the software developer, and by the management or executive of the system. And SUS can also be used on small sample sizes with reliability results. So it doesn't mean that we need to conduct SUS for many hundreds or many thousands. So smaller size could still be reliable. And SUS is also valid. That means it can effectively differentiate between usable and unusable systems. After we learn about this usability assessment, it may be interesting for you and for your team to consider as well that if we want to measure the usability of our system, what would be the criteria, what would be the metrics that we should use for our system usability test, and how should we plan for such a test? How would be the scenarios, how many of the participants that we should plan, what should be the time it takes, and so on.